Continuing on Plutarch's The Moon, the journey of the souls, the role in creation, and the descent of souls. Specifically, the moon and the journey of the souls, we're talking about the very face of the moon that terrifies the souls, although Plutarch himself presents the fact more realistically, saying that simply what the souls see when they leave the body behind on earth is nothing but a depth or a pit. The largest, in fact, of what they call the innards of Hecate. It may be, as Ion Magus mentions in his article, Who Steals Our Souls?, about the so-called region of the moon called the Mare Orientale, from where a purple double inner ray begins that sucks in someone's soul when he dies. In this part, Plutarch says, souls are punished and get revenge for what they suffer or do. Does it have to do with the so-called recycling area reception station, Sinus Midi, where there is also a famous building construction shard? The shard is there. Anyway, going here to what Plutarch said about the face of the moon. But souls are frightened by the so-called person when they get close, which is annoying and scary to see. Yet in reality, it is nothing but, just as our earth has deep and large bays, so these are the depths of the moon and the pits. The largest of these is called the innards of Hecate, where souls are punished and avenged for whatever they suffer or do. And two great of them are called gates, and through them pass the souls, one towards the moon, which looks like to the sky, and the other to the side, which looks to the earth. So let's see, however, from the beginning how Plutarch describes this journey of souls. In this story, the reader will find many similarities with Plato's ideas, and specifically with the way the soul is presented in the works of Timaeus. For both authors, man consists of three parts: the mind or the spirit, the soul and the body, where they proceed or are given to man respectively by the sun, the moon, and the earth. The mind should not be considered as part of the soul, as the soul is considered as part of the body. In Timaeus, the soul has a mortal and an immortal part. In the former dwells the thymic and the desirable, and in the immortal dwells the accounting. For Plutarch, the mind or spirit is superior or more divine than the soul, as long as the soul is in the body. The mixture of soul and body creates sensation, while the meeting of mind and soul creates speech. We mention all this because the central theme of Plutarch's story about the journey of souls to the moon has to do with double death. Quote, as for the death we die, one first death makes man instead of three, mind, body, soul, consists of two elements, and the other death instead of two consists of one. The first takes place in the land of Demeter, earthly death, and in it the mystery takes place, and the dead Demetrius were formerly called the Athenians. The other death takes place on the moon of Persephone, neighbor of one of the Xothic Mercury, of the other the celestial. However, the earth dissolves the soul from the body quickly and violently, while Persephone softly and for a long time solves the mind from the soul. For this reason it has been called monogamous, because the best part of man is left alone, as is separated from it. In the passage, then, it's clear that Plutarch refers to the double death of man and how differently they occur. Then they describe in great detail what happens to the souls until their second death. It's quite remarkable that for Plutarch, not all souls have what he calls mind-spirit, or as we would say, a divine spark. It most likely refers to what we call animal and inanimate beings, animate and inanimate people. What follows is an amazing description of the energy stripping of the soul by levels. Quote, each of these divisions, mind-soul, is achieved by nature in this way. Every soul, both without and with the mind, when it leaves the body, is determined by the addiction to wander in the area between earth and moon for a certain space, not equal, but unrighteous and unclean souls pay for their transgressions, while others pay as much as to purify themselves, and as if by steam, to exhale the miasmas coming from the body into the most peaceful part of the air, who call it the meadows of Hades, must remain for some time. In this, we would call the interval the souls before they reach the moon have the illusion of movement and live in a virtual reality, feeling mixed emotions. Plutarch uses the image of the sea and the waves to convey this meaning. Quote, there, as if returning to their homeland from exile abroad, they taste joy similar to that felt by those who are initiated into the mysteries, combined with sweet hope but largely mixed with turmoil and excitement. Indeed, many are the ones she pushes and pushes away with the wave, even though they are already caught by the moon. Some of them again see them overturn and sink as if on the bottom again. End quote. After this interval, the souls on the moon are anchored, which Plutarch resembles with rays, but which have fire in the soul that lightens and goes upwards. Apart from the face of the moon, which as mentioned above terrifies the souls, another element that has the same effect is its shadow, and specifically the shadow of the earth that falls on it in eclipses. In this, Plutarch says the souls of good urge her to move faster to get out of the shadows because when they are under it, they do not listen to the music of heaven or else the divine harmony according to Plato. Otherwise, the souls of the unrighteous pass through the shadows with sighs and groans, and that is why most people are accustomed to making noise by hitting metal during eclipses to make a splash against the wicked souls. It's known that the beating of metals in antiquity was considered to have the power to prevent evil, and for this reason it was done during the eclipses to ward off the evil spirits that caused them. Some of these souls there, which Plutarch calls demons, descend to earth to take care of divination and to attend and take part of the highest orgy ceremonies, also to help and protect those who are wronged, to save people in wars and in sea. But those who err, they are imprisoned again in human bodies, that is, they incarnate again before the second death comes, as in the other souls. And from this point on, Plutarch in the paragraph describes exactly what the second death is, and a change as he sees elsewhere for the better. This is nothing but the separation of the mind from the soul, which for some souls comes early and for the others later. It's the moment when the soul, being the envelope of the mind, the spirit, the divine spark, unfolds it so that it returns to its source according to Pluto, the sun. Quote, they achieve the change now, some earlier, some later, when the mind is separated from the soul. It's separated through the love of the image of the sun in the sun, with which it shines and seems desirable, the beautiful, the divine, and the blessed, which every nature, each in its own way, longs for. End quote. But the essence of the soul nature remains on the moon, maintaining some traces and dreams of life, so to speak, and for it to be considered correctly, so it said, the soul, like a dream, fluttered and flew. In fact, it does not happen immediately, not even after it leaves the body, but later, when it's left alone and alone after it's separated from the mind. In short, this second death is the return of the trapped divine spark to its original source, creation. And the moon plays a key role in the separation of the soul from the mind, so that the latter escapes from the prison of creation and returns back to the divine flame, like the souls who have wisdom and longed for philosophical life without scourges, such as reports Plutarch. Just as the earth, the body, is separated from other two parts, so it is on the moon, which is the border for the prison of souls. The struggle for liberation is quite difficult. Quote, from the souls who loved values, action, from souls who fell in love with bodies and worked with the spirit, some live and sleep, dreaming what they remember from life, but if the unstable and passionate element arouses them and pulls them from the moon to another genesis, the moon does not leave them, but calls them back and keeps them with magic to lean towards earth. End quote. At the end of the dialogue, the reverse process, that of Genesis, is briefly mentioned. The sun reaps the vital force, the mind. Then the moon sows it and creates new souls, and the end of the earth dresses them with bodies. The big difference being these three celestial bodies is that both the sun and the earth give something, while only the moon gives and takes together and composes a divide and divides according to its different forces. In all this process of genesis, the 3 degrees, according to the ancients, play a big role. The atropos installed in the sun initiates the genesis. The cloth that moves around the moon connects the mixes, while the last around the earth participates in the work, la chessis. In closing, Plutarch states that the inanimate is weak in itself and is influenced by other things. The mind spirit, on the other hand, is unaffected and emperor. Genesis and apogenesis. Porphyry, 3rd century AD, in his work on the Odyssey of the Creative Nymphs about the cave of the nymphs in the Odyssey, connects the fact of the birth, hence the ascension of the soul from the material world with the sun, and process of genesis with the descent of the soul into the material world connects it with the moon. He states, like other theologians and early traditions, that both the sun and the moon are the 2 gates, quote unquote, through which the ascension and descent of the soul takes place respectively. No matter how many spheres or layers the soul crosses to rise outside of creation, the moon in all these traditions is the last and lowest prison before the world of matter. As it is the last station of the descent of the soul, it's the moon that completes the process of incarnation. This is exactly what we are talking about, as we saw in part of the work on the face of the moon by Plutarch. But to understand the role of the moon in the matter of Genesis, let's say a few things about the cosmological system in antiquity and its divisions. In addition to the division of the world into 7 celestial spheres that were quite popular in Hellenistic and late archaic times, the division of the universe took place in 3 other spheres: the material or earthly, the etheric or cosmic, and the mental or supernatural. From this point of view, instead of having rulers controlling these spheres, each of them was under the influence of the earth, moon, and the sun, respectively. The moon is the system. In this system is the lower limit of the cosmic sphere, and so the material world under the sky is often referred to as the submoon, which is largely controlled by the forces of the moon. These 2 different divisions of the universe, 7 spheres and the 3-part division, do not invalidate each other. They simply emphasize different celestial bodies. The face of the moon in cosmology. According to the sources, the moon seems to show us 2 faces in terms of souls, one merciful and one scary. We will see that this has to do with how Genesis creation is evaluated in each case as a cosmological system, that is, either positively or negatively. The subject of the incarnation and specifically the reasons for the descent of the soul through Genesis creation, voluntarily or involuntarily, occupied many philosophers, whether it is the descent of individual souls into the material world of creation or the initial descent of the soul in general from upper spheres to the lower ones. In any case, the incarnation or trapping of the soul in the world of matter means that it does not participate in the perfection of the higher realms. This loss of perfection is translated in many ways, and each way gives a different cosmological view of the nature of the material world and the genesis of the soul within it. So the philosophers in their work seem to evaluate the incarnation of the soul sometimes positively and sometimes negatively, a fact that is connected with the merciful and the frightening face of the moon respectively. Thus, the role of the moon in Genesis creation depends directly on the perspective, positive or negative, and the evaluation of Genesis creation itself as a cosmological system. The most pessimistic position considers this fall simply catastrophic. The most optimistic view holds that the descent of the soul in creation into the material universe is part of the revelation of the divine expression for the completion of the world. Now think carefully and think about what and to whom the spread of this position serves. The descent of the soul in creation. Indicative of the negative role of the moon is its absence in various rituals of antiquity concerning the elevation of the soul, the apogenesis as they call it. For example, in the ritual preparation for an immortality spell found in the so-called Mithraic liturgy. It's programmed to avoid the presence of the moon during the ascension of the magician to the heavens to meet the supreme god, who is referred to as the son of Mithras, S-U-N. Although on this journey he's predicted to meet gods of other planets and stars, he never seems to see the moon. But why does this happen? Why should any sacrifice in all this ritual preparation avoid the influence of the moon? When it comes to the ancient cosmology that concerns the Genesis creation, the presence of the moon is dangerous and harmful. Her face on earth is associated with rage and madness. Clement of Alexandria mentions that Orpheus called the moon a mermaid because of her scary face, a view that, as we have seen, is shared by Plutarch. Her face, meaning Selene, it's got a feminine article. In Greek, Selene, Selene, is a feminine article. Her face is the idol of nature, the personification of the material world. In ancient times, the moon was the mother of the demons of the world, where evil spirits live. When one looks at it or calls it by the names given to it, then it brings the forces of Genesis, in other words, those forces that bind the soul to the body, those forces that keep man imprisoned in creation. The moon is not the stepping stone or the means of ascension, but a dangerous force whose every invocation must be avoided, as only positive forces can free the soul from black matter. What's important for the separation of the universe into these different shapes or spheres or layers is the notion that the soul follows a path of descent through them to incarnate in the world of matter through the process we call Genesis or creation. According to ancient cosmology, from each layer that the soul goes through in the course of its incarnation, it acquires specific characteristics from each corresponding sphere of influence. The moon, in turn, becomes a gateway through which Genesis takes place and separates the mortal, perishable world from the immortal. But for those who want to ascend, the goal is to overcome the very barrier of the moon, that is, the very representative of Genesis, who imprisons souls when natural death occurs. In fact, as Plutarch said, this alone is not enough, as the soul needs to die a second time before it even makes its way to another incarnation in the world of matter. Some cognitive systems report the presence of a number of lords at various levels who conspire to keep the ignorant soul in the material world, taking various forms as the soul ascends to apogenesis. Among these gods or demons, we find Persephone and Hecate as the purification of the moon itself that regulates the material world and is the force that holds souls locked in the dark world of matter. In the article by Ioannis Mangos, quote, "Who stole our soul?" and quote, you can read the excerpt from the text, The First Apocalypse of James, and revealing dialogue with an unnamed master who gives James secret knowledge about dealing with allogeneic entities when one is on the road of redemption. A few thoughts on the end. If all this seems paradoxical or excessive, consider the role that the moon plays in the physical life of living beings on Earth, from the period and ovulation of women that is closely related to the phases of the moon, to the phenomena of tides and periodicity in seas and oceans. As it seems already in antiquity, the operation of the energy prison of the Earth-Moon system was known. Who and why consumes all this energy has been the subject of much discussion on the website, and the prison of creation serves something and does not just exist to exist. And like any prison, it is necessary to have a system of maximum security, with the difference that here the prisoners themselves play a big role in it. Perhaps a fairly important factor in this whole game is that there is an innate dual energy directional current in all of us that when it flows upward gives birth to gods, when it flows downwards gives birth to humans. Only we have lost the compass between these polarities, and the energy, quote unquote, that's concentrated mainly downwards does not give birth to humans anymore. Of course, the aim is not to give birth to gods who create their small private clubs like other creations in which they are bored to death and best thing to do is just risk their immortality by fighting against another immortal. What may be at stake here is the need to believe that the world is mysterious and bottomless as an expression of the warrior's inner preference, as Don Juan puts it. On the other hand, you do not need to squeeze the world like a lemon, but to stay with it as long as necessary and then leave quickly. Quote, "It's true, as Plutarch says, that in these cases there is not really much difference between those who firmly believe in something and those who are very upset with them and distrust them, but do not mean to calmly consider the possible and the impossible. Awareness, after all, is far from distrustful." And these are from various sources from Plutarch, Ion Magus, P. Koons, Geographical Significance of Plutarch's Dialogue, Radcliffe G. Edmonds, Faces on the Moon, Cosmology, Genesis, and Mithras Liturgy, and I've translated this from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.